One face of African youth. As the African Union marks its 50th anniversary, what will the next 50 years hold for young people across Africa? Africa is the youngest continent in the world. 60% of its population is under 25. By 2050, it will make up nearly a third of the world's population. Its labour force by then is projected to overtake India or China's and reach 1.1 billion. Impressive figures. But what does this mean for young Africans today and tomorrow?
Well, everybody is actually very concerned about youth because of what happened in North Africa. It got the attention, and people now realize that it is much more important to give them space, because they are saying we don't want to be associated with designing the future. We want to be part of what is happening now.
In May 2013, Addis Ababa provided the venue for the 50th anniversary celebrations. But while the event commemorated the past, Africa's leaders were keen to look to the future.
We congratulate all Africans here and in the diaspora, women, youth, workers, business, professionals and civil society for their commitment to the African cause.
We seek to focus on the implementation and delivery of the promise of prosperity to our people. We are shifting from theorizing about human and people's rights, gender equality, inclusion of youth and vulnerable groups, to having these values become part and parcel of our day-to-day modus operandi.
Central to the celebrations was this event, hosted jointly by the AU and the Economic Commission for Africa, the ECA. It brought young people from across the continent together in dialogue with their leaders. Up for discussion was Africa 2063, a vision for development across the continent, showing what it could look like in 50 years' time when these young people will themselves be old.
70% of our population is composed of youth. As we move in the direction of the future, we must recognize that it is by empowering our young men and women that we will be able to fully exploit the potential that this continent has.
As we celebrate the 50 years of African unity, we can now say Africa has come of age, that indeed the Renaissance is now with us. And Africa today is the continent of opportunity.
The youth of today, they know where they are going. And what they need, we have to provide opportunity.
The voice of youth in the Arab Spring has given Africa 2063 a new urgency. It isn't the first plan that aims to eliminate poverty in the continent, but now governments face a stark choice: deliver young people jobs and a decent quality of life, or face unrest, even revolution. But what did the delegates themselves have to say? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
I think it is important for us as young people to be challenged that the leadership of Africa depends on us, not on the older people whose generation have already gone.
Thank you.
There are two ways to unite people. Either you have a common enemy, like the fathers of the African unity who fought against colonialism, or you have a common goal. The enemy is gone. What is our goal?
Actions speak louder than words. As African leaders, why is it that as youths we are feeling neglected? Why are we feeling we're not part and parcel of the sharing of the cake? Is it because you feel threatened by us?
The location for this intergenerational dialogue was itself charged with history, the Africa Hall. 50 years earlier, when this building was new, Africa's first generation of post-colonial leaders met here to lay the foundations of the Pan-African dream. Then, the struggle facing the continent was easily defined. It was against the European powers who'd colonized and exploited the continent and its people for centuries.
The legitimacy that was given to the older generation, they came to power because they fought for independence, and many of them have been associated with power for quite some time. They tend to think that the youth have to wait their time. But in fact, if you look into at what age the heroes of Africa came to power, at what age they started most of the movements that led to Pan-Africanism, you'll see that they were the age of the youth claiming to have participation now.
As a young man, Kenneth Kaunda had led Zambia to freedom from colonial rule. Back then, he and his fellow African leaders held hope and the future in their hands. 2 decades after he left office, what advice does he have for the new generation of African leaders?
There is hope for them if they can continue to do what we have been trying to do during this struggle, what we have been doing now, and then they can follow from where we're, take off from where we are. In the future, there will be peace, there will be cooperation, and they'll be fighting poverty and its offshoots of hunger, ignorance, disease, crime, corruption, and above all, exploitation of man by man. Once they follow this struggle, there's hope.
Poverty has proved harder to eradicate than anyone expected back in the 1960s. Low agricultural yields and economies reliant on exporting basic commodities, relics of the colonial era, have left the region hostage to fluctuating global commodity prices, at times taking nations to the brink. Far too often, panic here has spelt disaster here.
Nous voulons que les prix montent. Quand on prend, les planteurs sont fatigués. Vraiment, nous sommes fatigués.
Africa 2063 is a bold vision that takes proven best practice as its starting point. In agriculture, successful use of technology as seen here could, if rolled out across the continent, increase yields, defeat hunger and end unaffordable food imports. It shows how the African producers can add value to their exports by processing their commodities before export, reducing vulnerability to fluctuating global raw material prices.
50 years ago, a lot of countries in Africa were doing better than countries in Asia. Whether it's Ghana, whether it's Gabon, whether they were doing much better than Thailand, than Malaysia, than China. But look at where they are. It's the political will, and then leadership, planning, execution.
Everyone embraced the vision, but many delegates were unconvinced that the existing political elites in Africa were capable of delivering it. They cited the failure of most African nations to agree to invest the 10% of national budgets in agriculture as agreed in the Maputo Declaration on Agriculture and Food Security.
Agenda 2063, we're looking at where Africa is able to export its own food. Now, 10 years ago in Maputo, the 10% agriculture was agreed by the heads of government of Africa. 10 years down the road, less than 10 of African states have been able to meet that commitment.
And I'm not here to ask questions. I've been asking questions for years now, so I have some demands, and I want, because the Honorable President was asking what can we do, so I have some demands for you. One is going to the AUC chairperson, Madam Zuma. We need a commissioner for youth and children affairs. A commissioner and a director for youth and children affairs. We don't want youth issues to be an ad hoc basis. Yeah, that's one. Number two, the leaders, you have to groom us by including us as part of your official delegates to the meetings you go to. And we don't want you to bring your relatives and your friends and the rest of them and the girlfriends. We want the young people that are the voice of the people.
Okay, thanks.
Number three, you have to, the only solution to African youth's problem is to ratify and implement the African Youth Charter.
All right.
Kenya has not ratified, Botswana has not ratified, and Liberia has not ratified. What is happening? Tell us.
Ratified what? Okay.
We have not ratified that charter because we want to make sure that once it's ratified, we have a roadmap for its implementation. Too many times we pass protocols, we pass resolutions, we have ratification, and implementation is always the problem. We are working with the youth group. We have a draft Child Act that is now being worked with the youth, and when that is done, then we are going to get not only the charter, but a Youth Act ratified, which makes it law and makes us responsible to enforce the law.
With 60% of Africans projected to live in cities in 50 years' time, the scope of Africa 2063 reaches far beyond farming. It sees the region developing a strong, independent industrial base that will create wealth and provide high-quality jobs in an increasingly urbanized continent. But with the growing influence of new trade partners, many delegates had a deep suspicion that present-day trade agreements were merely the latest form of neo-colonialism. Could they really deliver when 50 years of similar deals with the US and Europe had failed?
We are always complaining and going through how the colonialists took resources from our land. How do we ensure that 20, 30 years down the line, as African continent, we don't start sitting here and talk of how China robbed Africa?
The question is that we are receiving these reports, very recent research reports, which saying that Africa is losing $50 billion per year through illicit financial flows and unfair trade agreements, whereas our headquarters of the African Union is built by $200 million by Chinese government, which can be divided by up on 54 countries, which is only $3 million for Africans. So why can't we define our own future? Why are we always an echo of this rising Africa of the future, which was also the discourse 100 years ago? We need to define our own discourse and our own way.
The 2063 vision celebrates the growing power and confidence of Africa's culture.
We're growing and we're getting better each day. A lot of good movies coming up. A lot of brilliant producers, directors, actors and actresses. So, I mean, it's a growing industry.
If we have private individuals supporting the fashion industry, I'm very sure in a couple of, say, 5 years, we can guarantee another 5 or 10% employment opportunity for people on the streets.
But one delegate pointed out that a rich culture must include and celebrate all its citizens.
The World Bank actually estimates that 15% of Africa are persons with disabilities. But what we see in principle and in practice is that persons with disabilities continue to be marginalized and they continue to be not available in processes where others participate. Just by way of an example, I've been given this paper. I've just dreamt that maybe it's the program. I can't even read it. My point is, just to be brief, there is nothing African, there is nothing democratic, there is nothing moral about disability exclusion. Thank you.
The flame of Pan-Africanism that burnt so brightly 50 years ago was still alive in the hearts of many of the delegates.
Malgré tout, l'Afrique est debout et la construction de l'unité se fait selon le rythme normal des États. Il s'agit de parachever ce combat dans les 50 prochaines années par une intégration plus soutenue et par une lutte contre le chauvinisme national. Il est temps que les Africains se considèrent comme tels, comme Africains et non comme Sud-Africains, Marocains, Sénégalais, Égyptiens ou autres.
When the OAU was established, the purpose was to promote African unity. We Tanzanians have achieved that goal in 1964 when Tanganyika and Zanzibar united to form Tanzania. Therefore, I'm calling for other African countries to follow our example so that when it's 2063, all African countries will unite.
Okay. On a une résolution à demander à la prochaine assemblée ordinaire. Nous demandons à ce qu'on institue un passeport africain. Et le plus important, ça c'est une première résolution, parce que si nous voulons être unis, nous devons nous connaître. Et si nous voulons nous connaître, nous devons voyager.
A few days later, we caught up with some people who'd been at the event.
It was electric, it was very energetic, it was a bit chaotic, but I think that's exactly what the situation is. Youth is very, very anxious. They are very, very intolerant to the delays and the tomorrows and the thinking that is always given to them that yes, your turn will come. They want it now.
The youths were charged up, there were so many questions. Someone actually confronted the leaders who asked, what have you been doing? You know, the youths were daring.
A lot of time the youth are not regarded as a powerful force. A lot of time we are seen as impatient and a little irresponsible, but we understand what is at stake. The next 50 years are when we are going to grow up into the elders. This is the time now that we have to really determine what Africa is going to be for the next 50 years.
It is very important that we realize that this is a moment that doesn't come in more than a generation. You have a combination of factors and megatrends that are in favor of Africa, but this is not something that is going to happen over and over. If we don't catch this moment, it's like catching a ball. It's going to be very difficult to have another opportunity. So this is the moment for Africa. This is the moment for transformation.
We are here and we are ready. We are able. Use us.